Later on into the video, I'll be mentioning some records and seeds of teams that are off. That's because I wrote this video on May 8th, and just keep that in mind while watching the video. Last season, the NBA introduced the playing games along with the bubble. I think it was really fun to see the Blazers and Grizzlies face off for that last playoff spot, and overall, it was really great. It was a close game pretty much the entire way through, but after some good games by their stars, some good defense, lots of rebounds by Nurkic, and some very clutch buckets by CJ, the Blazers punched their tickets into the playoffs. The entirety of the postseason could have been different if the Grizzlies had Trey J, but we got a good game, and I personally loved it. This season, they brought it back, but in the form of a tourney. Today I'll be talking about this tournament, explaining how it works, and I'll be talking about 3 flaws from the tournament. Out of the many, these are just the most glaring ones. First, I should talk about last year's a bit more. This is why last season's play-in was so great. The bubble brought a lot of circumstances that showed a need for the play-in. Going into the bubble, there was a 3.5 game difference between the 8th seed and the 9th seed. They made the play-in because 8 games just isn't enough to make up that difference. And the Blazers did anyways, but we'll just see about that. The difference between the 8th seeded Grizzlies and the 13th seeded Suns was 6 games. That 8 games just isn't enough, so they made the plan. It turns out that even with the Suns going 8-0 and the Grizzlies going 2-6, the Suns still couldn't make up that difference. That did create a slight flaw in the system, but it would have worked if the Blazers weren't so good and the Grizzlies were just a bit worse. So with the Blazers going 6-2 and the Grizzlies going 2-6, the Blazers are in that 8th seed while the Grizzlies got the 9th. These two teams will play 1 or 2 games against each other depending on who wins. The Blazers would only have to win 1 game against the Grizzlies, while the Grizzlies would have to win back-to-back games against Portland. Dame and the Blazers ended the Grizzlies' hopes of making the playoffs quite quickly, and they moved on to the playoffs. Last year, the play-in was just 1 game. This year, it's an entire tournament. The formatting is the 9th seed versus the 10th seed, and then the 7th seed versus the 8th seed. There are 3 games. Game 1, the 9th seed will face the 10th seed. Whoever wins this game moves on to Game 3. Whoever loses is eliminated from playoff contention, and they'll be entered into the lottery. Game 2, the 7th seed will face the 8th seed. Whoever wins this game will move on to the playoffs as the 7th seed, and will face the 2nd seed in round 1. Whoever loses, though, will go to Game 3. Game 3. The winner of Game 1, which will be the 10th or 9th seed, will face the loser of Game 2, which will be the 7th or 8th seed. Whoever wins this game will move on to the playoffs as the 8th seed, and will face the 1st seed in round 1. Whoever loses is eliminated from playoff contention and will be entered into the lottery. Last year's play-in was about the higher seed against the lower seed. The higher seed would only have to win 1 game, while the lower seed would have to win 2. This year's, it's 1 game elimination, all or nothing. There have been a lot of questions about this tourney, but the main one I'm seeing is why is it 9-10 and 7-8 rather than 7-10 and 9-8? This is a question I asked as well, but the answer actually makes sense. Let's make a hypothetical situation in a different universe. Let's say the Lakers, Warriors, and Grizzlies were eliminated from existence. They just don't exist anymore, and we don't have to care about them. The play-in would now be 7th seed Spurs, 8th seed Pelicans, 9th seed Kings, and 10th seed Thunder. If we did a 7th seed versus 10th seed and 9th seed versus 8th seed format, that would mean the Spurs and the Thunder would face each other. The Thunder would then have a chance to eliminate the Spurs from playoff contention despite being 11.5 games behind them. Making it 9 versus 10 and 7 versus 8 slightly fixes that problem, but it really doesn't. This is flaw number 1. 1 game elimination. If we go back to our hypothetical universe, that would mean the Thunder are the 10th seed and the Kings are the 9th seed. In the NBA's formatting, that would mean they would face each other, and this still shows a huge flaw. The Thunder are 8 games behind the Kings, but with a single win, they would eliminate them. The entirety of the play-in tourney is led by this flaw. Just 2 back-to-back wins by a 10 seed who is 11 games behind the 7th seed could get them into the playoffs. If we ended the season on May 8th, aka the day I wrote the script, and we did my imaginary plan with the Thunder winning, it would be terrible. Let's say in Game 1, the Thunder beat the Kings. The Kings are now eliminated from playoff contention. In Game 2, the Pelicans beat the Spurs. Pelicans are now the 7th seed, while the Spurs will face the Thunder in the 3rd game. In said 3rd game, the Thunder beat the Spurs, meaning the Spurs and Kings are now in the lottery, while the Pelicans and Thunder are now the 7th and 8th seed. This means a now 23-47 team, when you add on those 2 wins, would make the playoffs over a 32-37 team when you add on those 2 losses. Obviously, this won't happen this year since the Thunder have no chance of making the playoffs, but if they keep on doing this year after year, it's eventually going to happen. It's absolutely atrocious, and there aren't many ways to fix it. They could use the format from last year where it's either 1 or 2 wins, but that still doesn't fix the problem if it's an entire tournament. Maybe instead of doing this, they could have 9 teams make the playoffs with a wildcard series in between the 8th and 9th. It could be 5 games like it used to be in the first round, but this entire tournament is terrible in this way. Because of this, we could see 2 terrible teams in the playoffs that do not deserve to make it. This tournament means that 2 games matters so much more than the 72 before that. And we could be seeing terrible teams in the playoffs. Speaking of terrible teams, that's flaw number 2. Bad teams will make the playoffs. Sure, I loved it last year, but giving bad teams a chance to make the postseason, even when they don't deserve it, is super unnecessary, and I don't know why they're doing it. I want more basketball, but I would rather see the best of the best teams face off against each other. The playoffs are about finding a champion. It's where the best players and best teams face off, with a season of hard work and a Larry O'Brien trophy on the line. I don't want to see bad teams in the playoffs, but this gives them a chance. Sure, giving them a chance is fine, but 2 games is not enough to prove that they deserve to make the playoffs. Last season, it was the 9th versus the 8th seed. A team that made the playoffs and a team that was right there. Making one team win 2 games and the other win 1 makes a lot of sense. The 9th seed would have a better record and they would have proved that they are the better team after those 2 games. Honestly, 2 games don't really prove that either, but 1 game sure doesn't. Saying that a team deserves to make the playoffs more than the other after 1 game makes no sense. The best team in the NBA, the Utah Jazz, lost against the Minnesota Timberwolves, aka the 2nd worst team in the NBA. That 1 game doesn't mean that the Timberwolves deserve to make the playoffs more than the Jazz. Last season, they added something very small that did fix this problem. This solution was really smart. If the 8th seed was more than 4 games ahead of the 9th seed, there would be no play-in, and the 8th seed automatically makes it. That's actually the exact reason we didn't see a Wizards Magic play-in last year. The Magic were 7.5 games ahead of the Wizards, so no play-in, they just made the playoffs. With this tourney, there is no solution to that. Teams with the 8 best records in their respective conferences should make the playoffs. But this tournament means that the team with the 10th best record in their conference could make the playoffs with the team with the 7th best. It's incredibly dumb, and the play-in tournament shouldn't even exist. Actually, that's flaw number 3. This play-in tournament is incredibly unnecessary and it's very dumb. Last season, the play-in was needed. The 8 games in the bubble just weren't enough to make up the 60-ish before that, or the 20 they were supposed to do. The play-in was created to give a team a couple games to make up that difference and possibly make the playoffs. You might say that 72 games isn't enough either. Well, it is enough, because every other team has 72 games that were set and scheduled since the beginning / halfway through the season. Last season, the number of games ranged from 75 to 71. The difference is that they were supposed to play 82. Everything about their seasons was thrown off, and it gave some teams an advantage over the others. There would have been no play-in last year if they had just played all 82 of their games. This season is practically 82 games, except just less fatigue and travel. Yeah, there are fewer games to win, but everybody else has fewer games to win too. It's also fewer games to lose. It'll be fun to see 6 more games with higher stakes, but I don't want to see a 10 seed in the playoffs, especially when all they have to do is win 2 games. I would much rather see a Jazz vs Lakers first round rather than a Jazz vs Kings first round, even at the cost of 3 more games. There are so many more problems with the plan, but again, these are the most glaring ones to me. So thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like, comment, just press all the buttons except the dislike one, and don't click off. I haven't said goodbye yet. Peace. You can click off now. When I'm with you, girl, I swear I can fly. When I'm with you, girl, I swear I